Hello, hello, everyone. Good morning, wherever you are at. Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning for our series of our supply chain dialogues. My name is Lebo Letwalo. I am your host and I am the supply chain coach. I'm looking forward to having a discussion with yourself. It's another exciting day for our series of webinars where we're discussing anything and everything supply chain. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about rebranding ourselves. We are talking about repositioning ourselves in supply chain. How do we rethink about our profession? I'm very excited about it. And how do we ensure that we don't forget ourselves within this profession, which means that you have to take care of your professional development. We have to make sure that from your side, you reposition yourself quite well in your organization and in the industry so that you get elevated. But at the same time, we get to elevate the profession and our profession called supply chain. I am joined here by our panelists, whom I will introduce shortly. Again, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you. Today is not really around us telling you what is happening. I want to see your notes. I want to see your comments on our chat box. I want to hear what your views are around rebranding. So our topic, our theme is around supply chain rebranding. It's about how we repositioning ourselves. And I'm going to set the tone about what we really, really want to achieve out of this session. So as you have seen, we have a jam-packed agenda this morning. Let me tell you how we're going to run the session. So I will introduce the subject as to why we're having this conversation, why we're having a series of all of this discussion. But afterwards, what I will ensure as well is that we're having our panelists sharing their insights on different areas. We have a jam-packed agenda. We only have up to 2 hours, but I think our session will probably be an hour to 30 minutes, depending on our engagement. But on their side, they have like 5 to 6 slides that they will share with you, but we want to talk. I'm one of those people that believe that practicality is the most important thing. We must just talk and discuss our profession, which is supply chain. So as part of our discussion, like I said, how do we transform our supply chains? Because we have a bigger challenge in terms of the industry, in terms of ourselves as professionals. And so I will introduce the panelists, like I said to yourself, and we're going to have a dialogue whereby Ms. Mary-Ann Karanja will be telling us about how you own up your voice. How do you challenge the status quo? I always say that you must stop being comfortable, because anything that's too comfortable is just not comfortable for me. When they say that it's greener on the other side, I said it's never green. There's always something. We always have to challenge the status quo and what we are doing. And we're going to have our discussion with Ms. Catherine Larkin, who will tell us about communication and how we brand ourselves, our images, how it matters. Because if we understand who we are within the profession and also in our individuality, you'll be able to know how to brand yourselves in the procurement sector, in the logistics sector, and in the industry. So Catherine is going to share with us as a communication and image branding specialist to say what we should be looking at. And then Mr. Mtutuzeli Mbonisa will tell us about how we enable career advancement and growth. Like I said, in sport, it's very, very important for us to grow, to develop, but it's also important to know how we elevate ourselves through our career. I always ask a question, colleagues, that as much as we talk about studying, having these beautiful MBAs, doctorate, so what? What are we doing as supply chain professionals? Are you making any difference? Is there any difference that you are doing? Are you planting the seed? Are you ensuring that when you plant the seed, you also grow it so that it becomes a plant that you want to see? So that seed, that plant that we want to see is the supply chain that we are talking about. So that's how our agenda is structured this morning. And afterwards, we will allow you to ask some questions. I will pose some few questions as well to the panelists. So let's check, colleagues. Let's ensure that we get your view. Let's get to really understand what your view is, what your challenge, and I want to hear what your challenges are within your organization as to why people think that you are the least important person in the organization, because I still continue to say that we are the most important people in the industry. So setting the scene, colleagues, before we go straight diving into the dialogue, I want to really bring some few pointers forward for yourself. As a supply chain profession, we have been challenged for the past few years. I think most of us coming into the industry, we know that some of our organizations are not transformed. We are still the most clerical people that we know. So everything is really, really transactional. We know that most of our stakeholders hardly understand what we do. You tell them that I'm in procurement, it's like, oh, you're just buying, that's it. But that's not really the case. But another thing is that our profession is not viewed as being superior. We see other professions viewed as being very superior to our supply chain profession. The engineering space and the doctors out there, the finance people out there, they are seen as being the most important professionals out there. The question is really why? But also another thing that I want to bring forward is that we are merely seen as being very clerical. However, research and what we are doing and seeing the landscape of supply chain and seeing how dynamic it is, we are seeing that supply chain is very strategic. However, the bigger challenge is within our corporate structures, within the industry, we are seen as being non-strategic. But another thing that I always share is that if anything goes wrong in our organizations, our supply chain professionals, our portfolios are always the ones that are wrong, right or wrong? Believe me, that is the reality. Everyone sees supply chain as that rigid organization portfolio that is not flexible, that is really stopping everything from happening in the organizations. So that is one part about professionalism. Now let me talk about yourself as supply chain professionals. I have to always remember and myself, about myself, and also remind a lot of professionals that we carry a baton. We carry a baton as supply chain professionals. But the question is, are we handing over the baton, or are we even thinking of going on to that marathon as supply chain professionals, changing the landscape? We struggle to elevate ourselves. We struggle to sell ourselves, and we are selling a service. We are serving our stakeholders. So it's us as individuals that's supposed to be elevating supply chain profession. So the question is, if we cannot elevate ourselves as professionals, how do we elevate supply chain to the next level? Remember, we want professionalism to happen, colleagues. So the question is, why are we not doing that? Now, talk about ourselves and let's talk about the industry. Let's talk about our organization. How do we ensure that we rebrand ourselves to an extent that people understand our value chains, what value we add in terms of the bottom line of the organizations? How do we become the advocates into the supply chain profession as well, because it's very, very important. So let's discuss the why. Let's understand your challenges, colleagues. Let's understand what is it that we need to do to set ourselves apart in terms of supply chain, to transform what we are doing and people to understand what we are doing in totality. So that's me setting the agenda, colleagues. Like I said, it's around branding yourself. It's about repositioning yourself. It's around building your influence and building your affluence within organizations. So that is me in terms of introducing the subject. You know, a nice part about being a host is that you sit there, you listen to everyone, and you ask the beautiful questions. So that is what I will be doing today. I will ensure that you get the most answers out of this discussion. Again, colleagues, thank you for those that are just joining in, for joining us for this dialogue. We are live on Facebook. We are live on Zoom as well. Invite your colleagues, because these are very important discussions around elevating ourselves. We can never get to being professionals if we don't elevate ourselves, we don't become advocates, we don't talk about our professions and the challenges that are really facing us as a profession. So as we start now, the first panelist that I am going to bring forward is Miss Mary Ann Karanja. Mary Ann, I hope you are ready to share your insights. You know, so we've had so many discussions before around what we are doing wrong in terms of the profession. And, you know, we've had passionately spoken about it as part of our dialogues in the industry. And we're saying that we have to be advocates. We really have to make sure that we are very vocal and reposition ourselves quite well. We shouldn't be scared. I always say that let's shift the zone. We must never be comfortable. So I want to hear your view, Marianne, around supply chain, in terms of your topic specifically, in terms of how we're elevating ourselves. I know you have some slides that you want to share with the colleagues, but I also want us to have a discussion immediately afterwards, and we'll also look at the comments that are coming through from our chat box. So colleagues, let me quickly tell you about Miss Mary, and she's joining us all the way from Kenya. I have seen some Kenya participants here. Welcome, 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 welcome. I want to see more of you and more of your engagements, because whilst we are on the other side in South Africa, we're thinking that we are alone. But the more we have conversation with everyone in Africa and globally, we realize that supply chain, it doesn't matter where you go to, we are facing the same challenges, colleagues. Welcome, welcome everyone for joining us. So Marianne has got over 20 years experience in corporate senior roles in Africa, and I love the Africa context. She's a turnaround expert in projects. She has a solid supply chain and procurement background and sound knowledge in the development of strategies, category management, contract management. Look at sustainable procurement as well, colleagues. Look at local content, which is our role. Start thinking around that importance, content, development as well. She sits, she's a branch chair for CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, and she also chairs the advisory council of VAMOS, a performing arts school in Nairobi, and as an audit and risk choir of the Maisha Borough Circle. Marianne, welcome, and thank you again for joining us. I want to hear what's happening in Kenya. Tell us about our profession. How do we ensure that we get to the next level? Let's talk to our profession. I always ask the question, like I said, so what? We are professionals. We have been challenged. Everything that we're talking about in the industry, setting the context again, is around corruption. It's around what we are doing as supply chain professionals. But we are very numb. We're not talking about the profession. We are not doing much, doing justice around our profession and being vocal out there and standing out there our ground to say that this is supply chain profession. And in fact, a funny part, colleagues, is that when you're talking about supply chain profession, I have seen as well that supply chain profession is starting to be very important because people are seeing tenders. And are we really about tenders? So Marianne, welcome and thank you. If you can share your insight, then I will keep quiet. I will recuse myself for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lebo. Thank you, everybody else. I'm really happy to be here to join and share my views. As Lebo indicated, I'm based in Nairobi, but then we've been chatting with her for, I think, almost a year now on procurement and supply matters. What I would say is that I do fully agree with you, Lebo, on the point that supply chain and procurement professionals do not speak enough and do not advocate enough for themselves. And I think this really stems from the bad name that procurement and supply has received in the media, because the focus in the media is always around what is not going right. So the focus is on corruption, it's on scandals, it's on who has stolen the highest amount of money and the lack of action associated with that. And which then puts us in a very difficult position, because sometimes when you're in a public foray, people assume that you're also making a lot of money on the side just because you're a procurement manager somewhere, which is not true. And I'll also speak to a question someone posed to me last week. An MD, a CEO of one of the big corporates, asked me a question and said, what's your view on procurement and the corruption scandals, and what should procurement be doing about it? And I actually said, look, why isn't the organization taking this seriously as something that the organization must handle? We acknowledge that it is a procurement process, but it is not always the procurement department that is at fault. We have the requesters, we have the budget holders. And if you look, oftentimes you'll find that people who are making money, who are skimming off money from the organizations, do it post-tender, post-award, which is really at contract management phase. and that can be addressed differently. So it's not about the procurement manager, it's really about the entire organization and the entire process. But allow me to start by just sharing my screen. I put together a few slides. I hope everybody can see this. Yes, I hope everyone can see my screen. So I'll start by saying again, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to connect with everybody who is on this session, who has logged on via Facebook or via Zoom. I'm also happy to connect on LinkedIn because that's where I'm most active. When Lebo invited me to share my views on the topic, I reflected on what owning up to your voice is, and it's really a difficult topic in my view, because oftentimes we don't think about how we are coming across. We don't think about what we are saying in our gestures, through our voice. We also don't think about what our silence communicates. So I did Google and try to identify what the world view is around what owning your voice is. And I think simply put, it's just speaking your truth, sharing your views authentically. So it's when you sit in a meeting, or when you're sitting with your colleagues, or when you're sitting on your own and you're looking at situations, then what's your view? And do you present this view? Do you actually honestly share what you're thinking? Because I find that in many organizations, we try to posture, we try to align with what we expect the leadership would want to hear. And that's why then owning your voice becomes very important. So the question is for us, and maybe I'll ask you to also share your comments and thoughts around this, is then why don't we do this? I mean, for those who don't do it, is what stops us from sharing our views? Yeah, because you have 100% rights to your views, your thoughts, your opinion. Yeah, you own that space. That's your intellectual property. So how come you're not sharing it? For those who don't, what stops you? And then the other question is then how often should we be doing this? Where should we do this? It's just think about it. It's I have thoughts, you have very many thoughts all the time. Someone presents a situation, or someone comes to you and tells you, this is really, really, really urgent. We cannot go to tender, we must single source, as an example. You most definitely have a view. So why are you not presenting that view? Yeah, and if it's a repeat situation or a repeat scenario, then how often should you do it? Because oftentimes we give up and say, look, there's a tendency by a particular department to create emergencies so as to single source, but you shouldn't stop. So the question is then what stops you? And then thirdly is where should we be voicing our opinion? Because sometimes if you voice your opinion in the same meeting room, in the same space with the same number of stakeholders, is it making an impact? Should you then perhaps change the where, the location, the person with whom you're engaging on these matters? I'm not saying that this will only happen when something is going wrong. Sometimes you also have a very good idea that can contribute to the bottom line of the organization, that can fast track delivery, that can infuse innovation into the organization. So where should you be presenting your views? And that's really what we want to unpack today. And then associated with that, because I said, look, it's owning up to your voice and then challenging the status quo. And the question here then would be then, what is a status quo? What is status quo? Because sometimes you're wallowing in a situation and you actually don't realize that you're sitting in something that someone else would define as status quo. When I go to procurement department, they always present the rules and the regulations and the policies first. They don't even want to listen to me. And that scenario, somebody else has presented as status quo. So the question is here, how do we identify when something is really status quo, it's the way it's always been done around the organization or around a certain location. And when you already are owning your voice, then question is, then how do you challenge this? Yeah. How do you go about challenging the status quo? So I'll go back to my slides and say, I have shared slides, or I put up some slides, but the reason I actually put this up is not for you or for the audience to focus on it. It's really to aid us in progressing these conversations, because I'm just presenting some snippets or some food for thought. And then when it comes to the Q&A, then I'm hoping that this will have generated some new ideas, new thinking, new questions for you, so that then we can take the conversations going forward. At this point, I'm just showing a few faces that I'm assuming, or I presume that we are all familiar with. And if you look at all these faces, you can see that these are individuals who are being heard and seen in their own authentic way. Really, because that's what we're looking for. So owning up to your voice, be seen and be heard in your own unique way. So, and here we're saying that, look, Oprah Winfrey, for instance, because that's the first phase, is renowned for connecting with people in a unique manner and lending her voice to helping other people speak their truth and rise. She defined a platform where she wants to do this. She's been able to deliver success in doing so. And you may say that this is because of her personal branding and working on her branding. So I'm hoping that Catherine, when she comes to talk to us, and we can ask questions around branding. If you look at Ms. Okonjo-Iweala, who's the head of WTO right now, she's renowned for her success in the public sector. And she has an unwavering spirit for delivering on her promise. So despite the difficulties and the challenges that we see, or we assume that people working in public sector face on a day-to-day basis, then she has delivered in Nigeria. She is delivering now at the WTO. So what is it, and how is she then owning up to her voice and challenging the status quo, and what is status quo for her? The third phase is a young girl, a teenager, Greta Thunberg, who has challenged the world to action on matter sustainability. And if you listen to her when she first presented, I know her voice was almost cracking, that she has a passion for an idea. She was given a platform to present this idea. And from that platform, then she's continuing to speak, her views on sustainability. She's a teenager. She doesn't have these diplomas and degrees that we have. She's not in a formal work environment. She's not a career sustainability person. She's just a student. The late Professor Wangari Maathai, for those of you who are in tune or attuned to Nobel Prize winners or understand their ongoings in Kenya, then she's a Kenyan lady. She passed on, but then she really was a fighter against deforestation and matters to do with environment, tree planting, etc. But she used her own unique voice because she wasn't very loud. She was extremely action oriented. I know there was a time she went to one of the public parks in Kenya and she stripped naked. And for her, traditionally or culturally, that meant something. But she used a different way in terms of her voice to draw attention to something that she wasn't comfortable with, to challenge status quo and get the world to focus on that. In the supply chain world, and Lebo here, I actually put Sherry Hinish because I was thinking, should I put Lebo? Because I think Lebo and Sherry are actually operating on the same platform. These are women who are influential, who speak on supply chain matters. If you're on LinkedIn and you're very active, then you would see Sherry Henish. She's also been recognized as a leading voice globally on supply chain matters. So what does she speak about? It's the same issues that we face. Where is she speaking? On LinkedIn, in YouTube. She's writing articles. And that is her voice. That is her voice, writing articles, using her voice to share her thoughts and ideas and to help others overcome the challenges that they're currently facing. The last person was really Eliud Kipchoge. I think, okay, Eliud Kipchoge, this face here, whom you all, I'm hoping you're familiar with. If you are into athletics or sports, then you'll know he broke the world marathon record by just saying he set his mind to something and said, I'm gonna beat this. So he challenged even his own status quo and said that previously I had set a record at a certain level, but now I'm going 159. And that's what he did. The final phase, for those who are in Kenya and are familiar with AMREF, we have Dr. Gidinji Gitahi. He is the head of AMREF in Africa. He had a unique way of just calling to action or attention on COVID response by AMREF, because we all know AMREF as an organization that does a lot of air rescue traditionally, but they've done a lot of rescue and transfer of people who are COVID affected initially, availing vaccines, and then speaking about the initiatives that the government is doing, how quickly, how slowly, etc. So he's used his voice, his expertise, his understanding of a medical world, and the AMREF platform, what they do in terms of medical logistics, to add and connect, say something about what's happening. So what this picture paints for me is that you don't have to be a renowned global figure to be able to own up to your voice. There's no one standard platform through which you can present your voice. It's really in doing the things that you do every day and in being uniquely yourself. It's just in being you. Yeah. So I'll go back to my initial question again. So what stops you? What stops you from stating your views, from presenting who you are? And I know for many of us, when we look at that, we'd say, so how do I start by what voice do I have? Let me understand. So what is my voice? And I like to just link that back to then simple things like, what are your strengths? What are you good at? Because there's what you're good at, like Eliud Kipchoge is a marathoner. He runs, he's an athlete. Okonjo Iweala is in public sector. That's what she's really good at. And then there's a second bit, which is around, and what do you stand for? What is your value system? What's your value system? It is oftentimes it is assumed that when you're in the procurement and supply field, you automatically are a person of integrity. And there's also an assumption that integrity is innate, that it's something that you're born with. But truth be told is that I think we are all born with blank, honestly, blank. You're just created, you come into the earth. Then you are taught many things. So if there are things that are not working for you, then you can unlearn them. If there are things that you do not know, then you now need to owe it to yourself to go and identify these things, yeah, and then learn them. So you shouldn't be, and I've seen many people talking about this and saying, look, I don't really have a passion for procurement. I just found myself in procurement and supply by accident. There's a book I read, which is so good, They Can't Ignore You. It's by Carl Newport. So I'm not saying that you go and buy the book, but in this book, he brings home a point, which is that you first have to be good at something before you develop the passion for it. So I know when I reflect on my own journey, I've done over 20 years of supply chain. And at some point I thought, hey, can I switch my career and become a HR coach as an example? And I asked myself, so where am I going to start? What are the competencies required for this HR coach story? Where do I pitch myself? What will my voice be? How would I know and identify the status quo? What niche am I going to create? And the more I read the book and the more I reflected on my competencies, and I realized, look, I'm really, really good at the things that I have done and built on over the years. So I have built a successful career in supply chain. I have very solid understanding of of the supply processes, of category management, of contract management, of supply relationship management, of leading the function and developing, then deriving the strategy for an entire organization around procurement and supply, in managing people. And therefore, when I add the other building blocks around project management, digital transformation, then I can bring what I'm really, really good at into that space and say, I'm a supply chain expert who can help you fast track your digital journey within the organization. So I'm really good at that. And when that realization hit home, then I realized, oh, I actually do have a passion for supply chain. And therefore, that's really where I have honed my skills. That is where I have very solid competency and capability levels. What are my experience sets? The other question that I said is beyond just the strengths, and it's who am I and what's my value system? And I'll also go back to a book and say on matters integrity, when I read this book, Virtuous Leadership by Alexander Harvard, he actually writes, it's simply stated, you're born blank, you're taught a certain value system. So if you have been in spaces where integrity was not an issue, you can learn to become a person of integrity. You can understand first what it is, then you practice. And it's similar to owning your voice, because when you feel you can't speak, you practice by just speaking, by presenting yourself in your areas of discomfort, in walking through your fear. Then you get to know what you are. You become good. You become much better than the person you were yesterday. So I would encourage us to all then just do an inventory, take an inventory of what our strengths, our capabilities, our competencies are, and there are various ways of doing this. In terms of your strengths, you can do the personality assessments, the Myers-Briggs, I forget so many of them, the standout assessment, etc. Then you would tend to know then whether you're introverted, extroverted in terms of your decision making, whether you're a thinking, judging personality. And what that helps you with is in connecting with others. In when you are speaking up, then you're aware fully of who you are. So then you know how to present yourself. And then that sums up, obviously, then what you bring to the table. What you bring to the table. I'm going to move quickly to the next few slides. This one is intentionally blurry. And allow me to say that it is really intentionally blurry. The reason I just popped up this slide is to say, look, if you're struggling if you want a go-to tool and you're lacking that, in terms of just looking at your competency assessment, the CIPS global standard already provides that. And it's a document that is available. I think for everybody online, you don't have to be a CIPS member to access it. And I haven't been paid by CIPS to advertise the global standard, but I'm just saying if you're struggling to identify where you are and standing and rank in terms of procurement and supply competencies, please go there, download that tool. What the tool does for you is that you are able to assess yourself from the lowest level in terms of procurement and supply competencies and experiences from a tactical procurement level to an advanced professional. And even within that, then you can also be able to evaluate your specific competencies from an awareness session. Are you aware? I'm not aware. To one where you are at mastery level. And there's a scale above that, which we refer to as develop new. So you're now the think tank in matters to do, say, with digitalization and supply chain. And that's not just looking strictly at the procurement bit, but we're also looking at infrastructure, processes, performance, people management. So the theme helps you look at how you make an impact to an organization, you make an impact on people, where you make an impact on processes, where you make an impact on innovation, so that then you're able to assess yourself vertically and horizontally, and then see what else you need to do in order to improve your delivery points. So I'll speak about myself in owning my voice and the tools that I have found worked for me. I've used this 4-box model for a very, very long time. And I'm just trying to see, because I can see myself now and I don't want to see myself. Sorry. The 4-box model And when someone asks me, what do I bring to the table and what has helped me get to where I am now, it's a sum of various things. So obviously there's the job that I do, the experience sets that I've had through my career journey, along my career journey. And what I want to say here is that your career must be planned. Please do not leave it to the forces of nature or the forces of the organization and individuals in the organization. It is you who has to determine that right now, if you're a junior buyer in an organization, you want to become the CPO of DHL supply chain. Well, I love DHL supply chain, so I will call it out. But you want to become the CPO of DHL supply chain within, give yourself reasonable number of years, so say 15 years. And therefore, your experience sets have to be planned. You have to determine in 2 years, I need to be at a certain competency level. I need to have a certain level of exposure. I also need to experience different organizations from FMCG to oil and gas to services, etc., because you need to plan that. And the clarity that gives you, in so doing, then what happens is that then you're able to also identify points where you need coaching and mentorship. And that's what I have been able to do. I was fortunate that I was mentored in one of the organizations where they said, look, where you have high performing teams and you high performance individuals, and you need to assign them mentors, and that also helped me. That's one. Secondly, there is obviously the skills gap, the fundamentals that you need to cover through professional qualification, and you select therefore whichever professional qualification you must have or you want to pursue, whether it's SIPS, ILT, CILT, or leadership courses, because you're not just looking functionally in terms of the experience, but also broadly in terms of capabilities. So if I want to operate at the CPO level, then I must be able to manage and influence at the board level. So it's just think about that, because that also requires some planning. And then finally, because I've talked about professional experiences as I talk about the job itself, it's a reference materials, because you have to determine and decide for yourself that you're on a continuous improvement journey in terms of who you are, how you're showing up. And that's why for me, it's really important that I read books. I like to read and discuss. If you look at my LinkedIn posts, I post about books at least once a month. I post about a book I've read and my key lessons or key takeout from that. And the books help me reflect. They help me think in terms of how I'm coming across. It also gives me the opportunity to add value in terms of the conversations that I'm having. So when you talk about owning up to my voice, is that I own the supply chain space in terms of my thinking, understanding, experience set. But when I'm having conversations with the CEO of the organization around delivery, then I can still very comfortably contribute to conversations around market penetration, the digital transformation journey that we're going through. When they say, look, they want to attain certain customer touch points, I'm familiar with the terminology. I'm able to have a conversation and not 100% link it to supply chain, because I need to be able to add value and contribute. So the reference materials. I'm not asking you to do exactly the same, but just try and think about the building blocks that will help you fine tune and improve your voice and your contribution. The last point is on challenging the status quo. Let me I'm trying to hide this screen. Dock to bottom. Okay. So where and how do you show up? And in my personal reflection, I think the how is easier to state. It's with integrity, it's with courage, and it is with authenticity, because you're uniquely you. You cannot present yourself as Marianne Karanja. I cannot present myself as Label, because we show up differently. But the themes are more or less the same. So it's integrity, ethics, fairness, teamwork, supporting others, coaching, developing your teams, building a shared vision. That's really where you're supposed to be headed towards. Courage Courage, my friends and colleagues. Courage, you just have to do it. What will help you is if you identify your areas of discomfort. In the book, I'll go back again and say in the book So Good They Can't Ignore You, Cal Newport suggests that you try and train yourself and you encourage people to critique you to a level where it doesn't affect you anymore. You take it very positively, because most of us are really, really uncomfortable with criticism, are really, really uncomfortable with negative feedback. But that's one avenue where you can say, get a group of friends who will give you feedback and say, so how did I come across? Yeah, should I have said something else? Just encourage feedback so that it can build and grow you. And if you do that in an area of comfort, with people you're comfortable with, then you will be able to speak in a location or in a meeting where you're not very comfortable among strangers, because you'll have practiced taking courage. But where do you show up? I would encourage you to show up everywhere, every day, in the things that you do within your organizations and within your communities, because you're the champions of change. You're the enablers of this change that we seek to attain with the organizations. So speak up and share your views, and then support others actively. Say, look, I like that idea. Or say, look, I can help you in this particular area because I'm good at something. Mentor and coach others, and be present. Being present, I find that in the world now that we're living now, where we're very digital, oftentimes, particularly in virtual meetings, we are trying to multitask, and multitask didn't earn anybody any extra points. It doesn't lead us anywhere. So be present. Be present, listen, practice your listening skills, so that then when you speak, you're responding to a question that someone has actually asked. You're not wondering whether they're asking question A or B. So be present. I think I'll end there, Lebo. I'm sorry for running over my time if I have. But I hope that gives all the participants a view as to how to own your voice and challenge the status quo.
Marianne, thank you so much for that. I mean, you're really stimulating everyone's minds to really say that we need to change the status quo. We need to move out of our comfort zone. But I think what you're also bringing forward is that it's very important for us to fully develop ourselves, to know who we are, understand our strengths, our weaknesses as well. Because for us doing that, you are able to elevate and have a better discussion in supply chain. But you also raised a very important point as well around being in supply chain by accident. I'm really wondering, out of the participants that we have here, how many of us had enrolled in some form of procurement, supply chain management, or logistics degree. We've got all of those qualifications and where we have really been planted. My experience and having seen previously was that a lot of people got into supply chain by mistake, but at the same time now we are seeing that really changing, that we have more people enrolling for supply chain management. But I think for the gray beards like ourselves that are really existing, a lot has really acquired a lot of experience in supply chain. And it's only right now that we've already elevated the discussions and really having those post qualifications. But I want to ask you something that is really specific to supply chain. Why is it difficult, Marianne, for our supply chain professionals to elevate? I know you've given the solutions on what we should be doing. What makes it difficult for labor to stand up and be out there and raising our voice? Is it because our supply chain, remember I brought up a pointer that our profession is seen as being inferior. So is it because of that, or I know there's also the professional part. I always talk about self-esteem, self-confidence. And, when I put myself out there in the platform, I know I can open up my mouth. I can really say what I want in the industry, in any organization. However, there's always someone out there that is seated, that is not growing. They cannot voice up and really say that you are doing something wrong. They cannot voice up that the scope of work is incorrect. We cannot voice up and saying that the value chain is this way. It was the engineer who delayed. I mean, it got back to me, it was like 2 days late. What is it? What is that specific problem? Because for me, I know that that's the bigger challenge. We are not selling ourselves, period. And that's the problem. We are just not selling ourselves in organizations and also in our country. What is that one thing that you can really tell us and that people must be aware of as professionals in supply chain?
I would attribute that to lack of confidence, one, and lack of understanding. And the reason I say that the lack of confidence stems from the fact that, so let me start by saying, in my experience, in the 20 years or so, I find that one, we have a very cultural way of running our organizations. And because of the way we grew up in the African society and culture, we're expected not to speak up. We're expected not to raise our voice or add our voice to a conversation. And therefore, when someone is senior to you, then you would challenge to even just say, hey, I actually have a different view. So that's one. Number two, I also say that, look, this is to do with women. It's for a very long time culturally, we had raised girls, or at least we were raised to engage in a certain way, to also be nice. And depending on your definition of nice, then you will not say, I don't agree, And sometimes it's fine to just say, look, I don't agree, stated exactly in that manner.
Indeed.
But we go round in circles to say, well, you've raised a very good point, but perhaps you could consider. Now that is being nice. And that stops us. So I would still package that in terms of lack of confidence. The second point, because that was 1B, is a lack of understanding. Is that we must acknowledge supply chain for what it is. It is a very significant function and department. It is not one where we are brought to quotes to convert into purchase orders. So if you have a full breadth understanding of what supply chain exists to do and what value it can add, then you then have a lot more courage. You say, do you realize we can actually help you unpack your distribution problem? Do you realize we can? And that's where you start selling yourself. So please take time and have that understanding. If you're a buyer, you're just not a buyer. You're the CPO of that particular function where you are. If you're in a team with others, you're the CPO at that point. So think like one. Yeah, think like one.
My last question, and we're going to move to Catherine on the branding side. We still in the industry talk about procurement, purchasing, buying, supply chain, and some organizations still views logistics as supply chain in totality. And in terms of the definition of who we are, I'm always of a view that because we are still lost on who we are, it may also be contributory to that. What are your views around it?
I fully aligned. I say again, it links to understanding the full role of that function. So I do agree with you. So I like to use the term CPO because it sounds sexy, because it has a chief connotation to it. I rarely find people referred to as chief supply chain officer. I find chief procurement officer, and it equates to the chief executive, chief HR, chief. And maybe that's why it's caught on. But if you look at the responsibility is the end to end. It's from understanding the business need and translating that into delivery to the customer. And for me, then that means I am the entire organization. So it goes beyond supply chain. It goes beyond just my buying role at the moment. And if I do that, then I will be able to challenge your requirements. I go back to the bit where you say, look, someone brings you a quote and therefore you execute and you're not able to ask the engineer. I've had instances where people came and said, look, you need to buy a Toyota, which is blue. I said, is your need a vehicle or is your need a Toyota? Because if your need is a Toyota, then just go directly to the Toyota showroom and buy your blue vehicle. I'm not adding value. But when you come to the procurement department, then I'm trying to understand what you're trying to achieve by having this vehicle with you. What do you want to transport? Where do they go? How often do they go? And that's when we start the conversation. So the full breadth of that understanding is very important. Very important. I think it's going to take us a while to land the right title across many organizations. Yeah, but yeah, I agree.
Especially that our dynamic supply chain keeps on changing and changing. We're changing the roles, we're changing the supply chain skills. And I'm wondering right now, where are we going to end up? Marian, thank you so much for sharing your insight. I would propose that you have a look at the chat box. There are some questions, some comments, if you can respond. And some of the questions, I will ask them on the live question and answer session. Thank you so much. Colleagues, you had it for yourself. Get to know your strength, get to know how to elevate yourself, understand what supply chain really is. If someone says procurement is logistics, you should be able to tell your CEO or your CFO, whomever you are reporting to, what supply chain management is. So my question is, do you understand what supply chain management is? The full definition. What is procurement? What is logistics? What is warehousing? What is material handling? Do we understand that, colleagues? So get to understand, because as soon as you understand who you are, your role, and how you are positioned, you are able to challenge anyone and everyone in the sphere within which you are operating in. So thank you so much, Marian, for that. So we are going to talk branding. Like I always say, that the most important thing in terms of who we are and what we are, see, we carry the baton as professionals. I always say that when I sit out there and I speak, I represent SingPoint, I represent AWISCA, I represent the supply chain coach brand. That is me. So if I do anything wrong, Catherine, you will have to tell me that what will happen to my brand and who I am. But also at the same time, I keep on saying as well that as professionals, yourself as a buyer, as a procurement manager, an executive out there, you have a role to play in the industry. You have a role to be, because remember what I spoke about, influence and affluence. And Catherine, I always talk about, the industry, when you are in corporates, and when I really focus on mentorship and coaching, I say corporates gives you an element of influence, because you are there, you make decisions and people love you. But what happens is that it gives you a little bit of affluence. But what happens is that when you leave corporate, you are nothing in the industry if you did not build that influence whilst you were inside, which means that your contribution to the industry. So you need affluence to take you to the next level. So Catherine, you have to tell us about that. How do you build that to ensure that any supply chain professional here venturing, they want to grow in the organization, they want to go outside to be future professionals as well, to run their own consulting firm as well, to be mentors, to be coaches as well? What will take them forward in terms of their brand? So let me introduce Catherine, colleagues, quickly. She always refers herself as a very passionate person, very professional and very persistent, and she loves communication, branding as well. She's a communication specialist with 2 decades experience in the industry, both in the transport, logistics, and supply chain in totality. And very committed in working in clients and ensuring that she elevates their brand as well. Catherine has been running her own public relations consultancy for over 19 years. So colleagues, with her expertise in the entire supply chain, I said to her, listen, you're a communications person, you are into branding. Come and talk to the supply chain profession. Let's talk about how we elevate ourselves, because we need to position ourselves within our organizations, and we also need to position ourselves within the country, because we contribute to the economy. So Catherine, the spotlight is yours right now. If you can share your few slides with the colleagues, and we will be listening. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Lebo, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of this very important but exciting dialogue. I'm just going to share my screen. If you can just confirm that you can actually see it.
Yes, we can see it, Catherine. Thank you.
Perfect. So good morning, everyone. In my presentation today, I'm going to be looking at three main things. Firstly, what is a brand and why is it so important? And then secondly, the positioning of supply chain and yourself in terms of branding. And then thirdly, looking at what we can all do to elevate the supply chain through branding, communication, and image building. So first of all, just a couple of quotes from some industry leaders in terms of how important branding is. If we look at what Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, says, brand is just a perception, and perception will match reality over time. And then we look at the founder of Amazon.com, Jeff Bezos, and he says, your brand is what other people say about you when you are not in the room. So if we look at a brand is not just a logo, a website, or some business cards. It's actually an experience. And that is what I will be coming back to you about in this presentation. Everything you do, everything you say, everything you create, the people that you interact with, how you present yourself impacts on your brand, whether it is your own personal brand, whether it is your company brand, or your employer's brand. So what exactly is a brand? People often confuse brands with things like logos or slogans, which are really just marketing tools. A brand is an intangible marketing or business concept that helps people identify a company, product, or individual. A brand is the way the product, company, or individual is perceived by those who experience it. So it's much more than just a name or a logo. It's an experience. So why should you, as someone in the supply chain, really care about branding? Well, firstly, it really is an opportunity for you to elevate yourself or your business, as well as the profession of supply chain. Supply chain is a very competitive space, more so now than ever, since we now work in global supply chains. We're no longer competing with local colleagues and companies. We're competing on a global scale. So we really need to up our game. So branding creates a very memorable impression. And once that impression is created, it's actually quite difficult to change. But if you are consistent with your branding, your customers and your clients will know exactly what they can expect from you. So a good brand creates consistency and reliability and really builds trust. Thirdly, if you have a good brand, it sets you apart from your competition. If you do it well, it makes you instantly recognizable. And lastly, it makes it clear why companies should choose you and not someone else. So to demonstrate the importance of branding, I want to show you these photos and just ask for your inputs in terms of, if I had to show you these photos, what would you say this woman does? Looking at the way she's dressed, how she's standing, the kinds of photos that, the kind of things she's doing in the photos, what kind of work would you say that she does? Perhaps you could just share your comments in the chat room, but I'm not able to see what those comments are. Lebo, perhaps you could just share that with me. But if you had to look at this lady, would you say, if she said to you, I can help you elevate your supply chain business, would you believe her? If I told you she was a stockbroker who could invest your wealth and make you millions, would you actually believe her? Would you give her your business? Do you think she knows what she's talking about? And also look at the quality of the photos. And now if I had to show you.
Let me
Yes.
share with you.
Yes.
Someone said that she's a retiree. Angela, swimming instructor. Mampeo, she looks successful like a business lady living in luxury. Those are the responses.
Oh, fantastic. Now,
Yes.
let me show you these photos of this lady and ask you, how would you describe this woman? What kind of work do you think she does? Would you look at working with her in your supply chain business? Does she look like an expert, someone you can trust, someone who knows what they're talking about? What do you think this lady does? And Lebo, maybe you could share that with me too.
All right, some few responses that has come through. A businesswoman. Someone say Martha, she looks reliable. And then Martha Stewart, our world famous chef. And then Anne says that she's a top executive. Someone says a real estate agent.
Yes, well, absolutely. The lady who said, the person who said this is Martha Stewart, she's absolutely correct. And the photos from the previous slide were also of Martha Stewart, but obviously not dressed up and positioned. So yes, Martha Stewart, she's an American entrepreneur. She's created a business empire worth over 600 US dollars, which in our Rand translates into 9 billion Rand. She's highly successful. She's built a business empire. And she did actually start her working life as a stockbroker. But just from the first set of photos of her versus the second, you can see how your perception of her is immediately very different. So these pictures really demonstrate the importance and the power of good branding and the disaster of bad branding. So a brand is not just a logo. It's about your vision, what you do. It's about your mission, how you do it. And it's about your values, how you are seen. So branding your supply chain really is about delivering on the promises of your brand with a supply chain that inspires customer and partner loyalty in the long term. So moving on from that, the power of good brands. If I said to you, just do it, is there a brand that would instantly come to mind? Yes, you're right. It's the Nike brand. Just do it. Just by saying 3 words, you know which brand it is, and you know what that brand promises too. And if I said to you, open happiness, which brand would that instantly associate with? That is the global Coca-Cola brand. And you know instantly what the brand is and what experience you are going to have with that brand. We can take another brand. If I had to show you these photos, there's no company name on this aircraft, but the color, the cheeky text, the positioning of the brand makes it instantly recognizable as Kulula, kulula.com. So let's move on to the supply chain now. We have a lot of work to do in terms of building the supply chain brand and positioning itself. And both Lebo and Mary Ann have spoken about this. We have many challenges. First of all, not many people really understand what supply chain is. Often people use the term without really knowing what it means. They will say supply chain, but they actually might mean procurement or logistics or transport, but they use the words interchangeably. So we really need to assist in educating people about what supply chain is. Supply chains are everywhere and they touch every part of our lives. And we don't really see them until supply chains go wrong. The strategic importance of supply chain management has not been recognized. It has been misunderstood and really undervalued. Although I do think over the past year with lockdown and the COVID-19 pandemic, the profile of supply chain has been raised, and companies and people are starting to truly understand and appreciate what supply chain is and what it does. Here are some other quotes about supply chain, and it really is exciting when leaders like Elon Musk recognize that supply chain is complex. As he says, the supply chain stuff is really tricky. And that's recognition for our professionals. Here are some headlines about supply chain that have been spoken about just this year alone. And you'll see whenever supply chain makes the headlines, it's always in a negative context, whether it's talking about bribery, lack of performance, corruption. But how do we actually change this? What can we do? The good news is that there actually is a lot we can do. By elevating the supply chain, you can grow your credibility in the industry and really position yourself as a leader in this space. So let's look at some of the things you can do as an individual. Firstly, you can join an association or institute related to what you do. But more than that, get involved in their activities. Volunteer to serve on their different committees and working groups. These will expose you to a whole new range of debates, various industry challenges and projects. In short, they offer a lot of learning opportunities. It will also link you to like-minded people as well as industry leaders. And this can position you very strongly in the industry. But it will also enable you to create awareness about the supply chain, its challenges, and so on. The second thing you can do is get designated. This is becoming increasingly important. National Treasury in South Africa is committed to professionalizing the supply chain and has created a body called the Interim Supply Chain Council. And this is one of their key initiatives to reduce corruption in the supply chain. And they will be introducing legislation in the coming years in terms of which, if you want to practice in supply chain in the public sector, you will need to be designated. And that means have initials after your name. This is very similar to other professions. If you look at a chartered accountant, they carry the initials CASA after their name, which stands for Chartered Accountant of South Africa. If you are a professional engineer, you carry the initials PREng after your name. And if you're a doctor, you carry the initials MBBCH after your name. If you have a designation after your name, it instantly elevates you and sets you apart from someone who does not have one. But it also, at the same time, elevates our profession of supply chain. You can see on the slide, the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport currently has 3 designations: MILT, CMILT, and FCILT. These stand for Member of the Institute, Chartered Member of the Institute, and Chartered Fellow of the Institute. CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply Chain, Supply, also have designations. And when you are designated, they look at both your experience in the industry as well as your qualifications. Number 3, develop your own unique brand voice. Keep up to date on happenings within supply chain through LinkedIn, reading newspapers, attending relevant events, and so on. Comment on developments, have an opinion, and share your opinion. You know, technology and digitalization have made this really easy, but it is also really easy to make mistakes. So always think carefully and responsibly before you publish or post something. Ask yourself, does it send the right message? Does it look and sound professional? Is the tone of voice correct? Perhaps you're being too aggressive or too casual. You know, often it's easy to respond instantly to things on social media without really thinking things through carefully. And sometimes, you know, we can react emotionally without thinking through the long-term consequences of that. The fourth way you can elevate yourself in the supply chain is through compliance. And compliance is now more important than ever. Make sure you are compliant in everything you do. If you have a company, make sure you are registered with all the bodies you need to belong to, and make sure you stay up to date with submitting returns and payments. There are many things companies in supply chain need to adhere to, whether it's through SARS, paying employees tax, VAT, your skills development levy. If you're in the trucking industry, you need to belong to the National Bargaining Council for the road freight and logistics industry. There's workmen's compensation, there's occupational health and safety issues. And now there's the Protection of Personal Information Act, which comes into full swing from the 1st of July. So there are many things that you as a business need to comply with. Now, moving on to how do you elevate the supply chain within the organization where you work? There are also many things that you as an individual can do. Firstly, you can gain new insights from stakeholders within your company. Chat to people in your legal department, in your finance department. Chat to your suppliers, your external agencies that you deal with. Tell them about the supply chain, the role it plays within the organization. Get a conversation going. You can also, number 2, develop a formal stakeholder communication plan to make sure that you talk on a regular basis and you have different activities and interactions to encourage engagement with colleagues. And 3, I think it's important to talk about what supply chain actually achieves. Talk about how it improves sales, how it grows revenue, how it increases market penetration. Share the stories of success of supply chain. Fourthly, focus on the value of supply chain rather than when you're chatting with someone about policies and procedures. Let's speak about the real value that supply chain delivers. Number 5, when your employer brings new people on board and they run induction programs, include supply chain in this discussion so that even as you onboard new people into your organization from the outset, they have an understanding and are aware of the supply chain. There are, of course, lots of informal opportunities where you can chat to colleagues about supply chain as well. The good old coffee meeting chats and the corridor conversations might not be there as much as they were because of lockdown. But there are many informal opportunities where you can chat to colleagues about the supply chain. And lastly, there are also forums. Whether they're supplier forums, stakeholder forums, there are structures within your company which provide an opportunity for you to build credibility in terms of yourself and what you do, but also about the broader supply chain industry. Then thirdly, outside of your company, there are also a number of things you can do to grow your profile and that of supply chain. Volunteer to represent your company on various industry bodies. You know, you'll find that most companies belong to trade associations relating to their industry, or they belong to chambers of commerce or working groups that are set up by industry to resolve industry challenges. Volunteer to be part of these. Not only will you learn a lot, but it will also get your name out there. It will expose you to new opportunities, and you will interact with industry professionals and leaders. And that's really important because we need to associate with people to whom we aspire to be like. So yes, one can also write articles and share these, whether it be with trade publications, relevant online platforms, newspapers, etc. Follow the news carefully and share your views. Write opinion pieces. Start a blog. Be active on LinkedIn. In this age, there is just so much we can do and that you can do to make your voice heard and make your voice stand out. So, in summary, I think it's about networking, it's about lifelong learning, it's about being visible in the supply chain, it's about delivering value, and it's a journey. Things are evolving, things are changing all the time, and we need to stay one step ahead of the game and our competitors. The slogan of the Chartered Institute of Transport, I think, is a great way to end this session. It's hashtag stronger together. I really believe in collaboration. These days, you need to collaborate, work together. Mary Ann was talking about teamwork. Really, if we are to grow ourselves and the supply chain profession, we need to do it by working together. So I think that's the end of my presentation, Lebo.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I think if there's one thing I comment in industry and our everyday level is really branding. And that's the most expensive thing ever. I always say when you're talking about branding, positioning yourselves for people to remember you, it is a very costly exercise. But you know, your approach in terms of how we should be doing it as professionals, I think it's very profound. And you're saying that we need to build our network based. And when you look at organizations, get to know your stakeholders, get your stakeholders to know how you are there to serve them as well. Get to understand your own value proposition as a supply chain department or a procurement department, whichever you call it. And position yourself, get to know what you stand for. You are there to save. Like I said, we are saving our stakeholders internally. We're saving the industry in terms of the economy. Through the work that we are doing, we're creating opportunities as well. You know, from our organization's perspective, that's one of the things that's very critical that we must remember. But what you are saying as well is that we need to remember that our organizations are not operating in isolation. So in all that we are doing, we need to represent our organizations and ourselves outside in terms of the industry. So we need to be part of the professional bodies. We need to be part of the associations. We need to be part of the platforms that allows us to be known, to be sharing some insight with all the experiences that we have. So we are there to reposition ourselves in supply chain. We need to make sure that we volunteer as well. If it makes it difficult for you, so just volunteer, get to understand and get to know who is who in the industry. Find a mentor, find a coach out there, people that are representing the industry, because those are the people that must be your sponsors. They need to be able to elevate you to the next level. We have a great platform with AWISCA, African Women in Supply Chain Association, where we are saying professionals, youth, women, men, let us be part of this collaborative network that we have with industry bodies like SIPS, SAPICS, academia as well. That's how we need to see you participating, because we work in a collaborative world. So colleagues, you've got it for yourself. Let's contribute, be part of the industry bodies, because branding basically works. When you're out there, people look at your face, look at what you have done in the industry, the integrity as well that comes with it. So please make sure that you consider that in what you are doing, and it is not going to cost you anything. All you need to do, especially in platforms like this, you just need to show up. That's it. You just naturally just need to show up. So Catherine, from your side, thank you so much in really sharing all this information around branding. And we have to be out there. And for me, Catherine, I think the one thing that I want to really ask, specifically on branding, I mean, we've been talking about what we are seeing in the industry is all the wrong things that are happening in the supply chain. From the industry perspective, and for us being advocates out there, what are the things that we should be doing as professionals, as people that are leaders in the industry? How do we ensure that we carry the baton out there, specifically in the media as well, in terms of articles that we should be writing up? Can you just, guide us on anyone that wants to contribute to the industry? What should they be doing?
Yes, I think, Lebo, there is so much going on in terms of supply chain. We really need to highlight the success stories, share case studies of what supply chains that have been successful, instead of always looking for the disasters and the challenges. Let's look at supply chains that have got things right. Let's learn from that. Let's share the knowledge. And that also positions you as a thought leader in supply chain, but it also elevates the supply chain profession.
All right, thank you so much. Colleagues, if you are seated there and you're wondering how do you contribute to the industry, there's a whole lot of ways you can do that. I mean, from our side, we're always looking for mentors, for coaches on AWISCA. We want to mentor the youth. That is part of our programs as part of AWISCA members. We work with universities. So you can imagine how many students are with the university. They're looking for mentors and coaches. As an example, we have other thought leaders out there that are willing to mentor and to coach. We are seeking as well people that can contribute to our articles that we will be reflecting on our supply chain magazines as well. So be part of that. If you need more information, liaise with my team, with everyone that works around my space in supply chain. You can do it. Elevate yourself onto the next level. Colleagues, again, branding is very important. Like I said, the influence and affluence that is needed, it comes from yourself and ensuring that you elevate yourself to the next level. So the next chat is with regards to career advancement. Really positioning yourself properly in terms of your development and the importance of developing yourself to be able to elevate yourself to the next level. So my next speaker, my panelist is Mr. Mbonisa. He's a rose amongst the, he's a rose among the thorns.
It's the other way around, Lebo.
No, you're not a thorn. You are a rose at this point in time. Eh? Mbonisa, Tutuseli, thank you for joining us for this discussion. I always ask a male version as a male part of thinking. And let me tell you why I also wanted Tutuseli to be part of this discussion. We're talking about brand positioning, and most of us are females in the industry as well. And I always ask the question, how do you view us as females on the other side? And we want to elevate ourselves. And a lot of women come to me and they Lebo, please come mentor us. No one is recognizing us in the organization. What are we doing wrong? So, from the career elevation, I think Tutuseli, I always ask the question that, so what? We are professionals. I've got an MBA. Someone is a doctorate. Someone has got a BCom honors logistics. So what? And we're talking about career advancement. Is it enough? What are the things? Talk about, talk to us around career advancement and, this whole elevation. What does it really amount to? Because we keep on producing students they graduating out of universities, and I'm saying, so what? What are you going to do about it? So let me tell you about Mtutuzeli. Mtutuzeli is a co-founder and MD of Lukaya Consulting, and one of the people that is a supply chain expert. I tried to drag him, after he left corporate, and I said, you still need to be visible because of the amount of knowledge that we have in the supply chain sector. For some of you, I think you know him when he was a CPO with Prasa, and now he's running his own organization. So he's got a lot of experience in IT, HR, marketing, finance, and operations, which is one of the things that I love about supply chain, because I said supply chain, you become a jack of all trades. I become a finance person, an operations person, a safety. So these are the most important professional that we are in. So he's good in supply negotiations, development of entrepreneurs, process re-engineering as well, world-class procurement practices, as well as strategy planning, business development, and project management. Mthutuzeli, welcome. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts around career advancement and how we're elevating ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you absolutely very much, Lebo. And I think what I actually found quite good is that I never actually spoke to Marianne before now, but I was quite happy to actually see that we have quite a lot of sharing in terms of the things that we actually want to speak about. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And so I think what I actually quite like is that today we have somehow some level of a common theme, which is really around how do we start to actually break out of the comfort zone that we have had over the years. Supply chain, we know it quite well. Fundamentals, we know them quite well. But what do we then need to then do? How do we start to then move to the next level? So one thing which we need to actually understand is that when we start to say we want to elevate SCM, firstly, we need to also then start changing the narrative of how we have been actually viewed over the years. And I try to actually put to a large extent some of the characteristics of a number of organizations as to how are they now today, how are they doing things today as such. So in terms of what we need to actually start to change when we start to elevate SCM is that we need to actually have a mind shift to then say that let us stop actually seeing ourselves as just purchase order converters. Let us stop actually just seeing ourselves as just buyers and then all of that. Let us really start to understand as to what is the role that we actually play within any organization such. And so over the past, what you would have seen is that in many many organizations, we are just simply viewed as just those elements that are just simply converting purchase orders after we get quotations as such. In this state, we become monotonous, everyday work, the same work, nothing really ever changes. What we need to actually start doing, we need to then start challenging ourselves enough to start actually moving on to the last block, which is then value-driven SCM in terms of what the kind of services that we then offer. What you also find in certain organizations is that there is that big tussle between who is the owner of the SCM works, who is the owner of the day-to-day SCM ways of doing things. And what you will then actually find is that in this space, typically engineers, technical people would be the ones taking the lead in terms of going out to market, getting all of the codes, getting all of the pricing, and then just simply coming to us to say, please convert an order. In this kind of the organizations as well, you start to then also see SCM people that at least have got some understanding as to what is their role. They start to actually play quite a little bit of a game to then try to actually regain control as to how do they want to then actually do their own things. So what you will then see is that in an organization where there is always conflict in terms of who is the owner of what do we do every day, you will start actually seeing SCM teams starting to then say, I will just simply show him. He thinks he knows best. Let's see how far he gets. And that then becomes extremely toxic in terms of how we do things. And it adds no value to how we want to actually add value to the organizations that we are actually working for. In certain organizations, there is some level of common understanding as to what are the roles, who plays where. But I think also in this stage, the biggest issue that we have is that we then actually just simply settle for just simply cohabiting. It's just simply that I want to actually be seen as if I am doing some small things. Therefore, I am going to try to align myself to a very powerful leader, just so that I cannot be asked any questions, just so that I can be seen as if I am adding value. What then becomes key in this stage is that when you are actually defining roles, do not just simply define roles for the sake of just saying that, you know what, I just want to be seen as if I am actually playing part, but also push for equal footing, push for equal value understanding, just so that people actually know that you are not just coming to just actually sit in any meeting, but to actually add value, but to actually have some level of an input and not just a head as such. In certain organizations, luckily enough, there is some level of SCM teams taking back control in terms of what they do. The biggest issue in this space, though, is then that they take back control without really understanding what is the nitty-gritties behind what their role does. So they think that they are just simply taking back control. They just simply, then they just simply, just the steps tickers as such. So there is not much value. They just simply saying that from one process to the next, I tick off these things were done correctly. So instead of actually adding value, you then just simply become an administration kind of a compliance person that you are just simply ensuring that people are actually following your own process to the T, without really getting into the details of then saying that taking back control of the SCM process means that you also need to actually build capabilities which will then allow you to then add value in a more holistic side, and not just as the process ticker there. So what then we need to actually get to as an SCM organization is to really get to a point where we can actually say that we have a value-driven SCM proposition to any business, which then actually challenges us to then say that for us to be at that level, what are the skills that we need to actually be able to add value? What is the knowledge that we actually need for us to be able to add that level of the value? It then actually asks us to have a mindset change to then say that for us to be able to elevate ourselves, there needs to be a breaking out of the comfort zone, understanding that just the normal fundamental supply chain trades are not going to cut it. Just the normal experience as well as the knowledge that we have is not going to actually get us anywhere. We need to start breaking out of the comfort zone, which then also brings a lot of questions because you are going to be venturing into the unknown. And that's where then the lack of confidence, as it was said by Marianne, is quite key, is that we need to start working on those things that are going to be hindering us, because what we know for a fact globally is that an SCM role is continuously evolving, in a sense that if we do nothing about the skills that we have, if we do nothing about the knowledge that we have, enhancing on it, we are going to be left behind, because the SCM role on its own, it is evolving as such to a point where I want to actually say that I actually took from one of the studies which was done of late, which then said that, guys, we know that we have very competent people in this space, supply chain wise. We have all the needs, we have all the knowledge, we have all of the skills that we have actually either studied or acquired along the way, which we know that they are still fundamentally needed. But with the evolving of the role itself, we are also then seeing that we need to start to change our mindset in terms of what are some of the competency matrices that we need to actually start putting in for either our teams and even ourselves as the leaders in this space, to then say that it is not only enough to know foundation-wise as to what are the things that I need to then know, but in addition to that, we need to then also understand that there's a lot of business acumen items which I need to then start adding onto my own profile to really start to enhance it. Marianne actually stated it earlier on, to then say that the moment that you really understand what is the passion that you have, you can then identify what are the other building blocks that you need to just then ensure that you still stay afloat in the changing environment, and that you are able to then enhance the level of value add that you can have in a space that you are in as such. So this study was done to then ask people to then say, apart from the foundational knowledge, these are the other aspects that we actually feel that in this role you might need. Do you actually agree with that or not? And what I actually found quite interesting is that quite at the top of that, right next to the normal common knowledge that we need, key is the communication part, which is what we have just been listening to now, is that how you actually position yourself as well as the services that you then offer will then actually determine how do people place you within their own strategic realm. Because when they come to you, they are actually looking for a partner that can help them enhance their own space. Therefore, it is quite important for you that if you actually understand what are the specific communication elements that you need to actually focus on, to then ensure that when you are offering services, that you are able to actually, in the end, position yourself correctly. Key to also that, which are actually two things, is that business strategy. I think I think many a times we actually join organizations, and I think for me, I have been lucky to actually have joined organizations where there was no SCM strategy, and I had to actually come up with one. Many a times when we join all of these organizations, we actually join where there is already a set strategy, or that strategy is actually being done by the CFO and you have very little input in that. I think it is quite important for any SCM person to really understand what strategy management is, what strategy development is, because that will actually help you to then know that your own role, what is the impact that it will have into any business as such. We speak of things like financial acumen. Everything that you do within supply chain has a direct impact into the financial health of any company. And that is the one level that we actually tend to omit a lot. We don't actually acknowledge that we have the power to actually determine what is the level of profitability that any organization can have. Back in the days when we actually needed to increase profitability, people would just say, we're going to actually cut staff. It was the easiest thing to do. But we have now evolved to a new era where we cannot cut many people anymore. Now, SCM needs to start playing that role to then say, if I understand what is the role that I play, and if I understand what is the kind of service I can give to any business, then I will say I have a certain level of financial acumen, which will then lead to my SCM brand being enhanced. If you go to any business and you are going to approach them to then say to them, I want to actually offer you supply chain management services. You don't just go there to then say, this is how we do the process. We go in this way, we go out to market, we do category management, but you go there to then say to them, I understand what your business model is. This is the market that you are playing in. And in this market, these are the elements that will actually affect you from a supply chain side of things. And this is where I feel that we can actually add value in your space. And if we do this, certain key elements of your area will improve. For example, revenue will go up, and then so and so and so. Cost of sales will then reduce as such. So those are the things that when you go to any business, you don't actually go to them with the mindset of just telling them about how you are doing business, but you go to them with that mindset of then saying, this is the value add which I am actually bringing to your space through the services which I can offer, because then it will show them that you have an understanding of what they need and how you can actually assist them as such. So I have actually spoken about the evolution of an SCM role, and I think one of the things that we underestimate and most probably do not actually read a lot about. I like to actually read a lot about what is happening in the space of not only SCM, but also in the space of the general company management. And you will actually notice from all of the studies which have been done is that over the years, many organizations have actually started having a mindset shift to then say that initially in the olden days, if you were actually looking for a CEO, you would go to anybody who has an engineering degree or some level of a technical qualification for that specific market, and it would make sense for you to actually do that. But nowadays, we are living in a space where organizations have now actually understood that you don't need to necessarily have a technical qualification, but what you actually need, you need operational depth, and you need a candidate that actually understands what is value add of each individual process within an organization, which is then where we are actually well placed, because if there's any space that will actually know the full value chain of any organization, it's an SCM space. We get involved in all various touch points. We get involved in project management. We get involved in HR. We get involved everywhere. And as an individual, if you do not take that opportunity, you will actually lose out. You will simply become stagnant. So 4 things that are quite key for me is that you need to know your role and the accountability of that role. Understand the impact and the magnitude of an SCM role and the impact it has on an organizational profitability as such. Understand that what you do in category management influences cost of sales, influences EBIT. Understand that what you do in terms of your own supplier negotiations, in terms of payment terms, influences your own organizational cash flow. Those are things that you can easily link them to and then start to actually say, I want to have a different engagement with my internal partners to then say, when I actually come to you, I don't just come to you simply from a process point of view, but I come to you from a value adding perspective to say, I want to add value to your organization. Of course, secondly, you need to start actually making value adding development decisions. The kind of courses that you do, the kind of studies that you do, the kind of mentoring things that you do, the kind of mentors that you also pick. Because what is quite important is that you do not pick people that are going to tell you what you want to then hear. I will talk about myself. Over the years, probably I've had 6 to 7 mentors, and all of them are not in the supply chain space. Most of them are in the general business management space. Some of them are into the engineering space. Some of them have a very vast technological understanding, because I fully understood that for you to become holistic, you need to actually learn from various people that have other skills that you do not have. It is okay not to know. There's nothing wrong with you not knowing anything about IT, not knowing anything about engineering. The key is that taking the step to start learning about it, because you actually understand that it is one of the building blocks towards you elevating your role into the future. So the key thing is really around breaking out of your comfort zone, because we are very scared to move out of our own zone. And that is the worst thing that you can do for yourself. What even becomes even harder, and it is a very sad thing to still say in this day and age, is that it's even harder for the females in our space to actually stand up and take their own positions within an organization, and that is the saddest part as well. So on the right, you will also see that I have put pictures of people that are live example that have actually moved from where we are into the CEO roles, and it is something which is quite possible. On the last note, which I want to add, is that I want to add something that Catherine also said, is that become an active partner in your own space. Do not be scared to get involved in other programs within your own organizations that may not be in your own space, but they actually have a lot of value adding lessons that can help you to then develop your own space as well. So I think it's just my last slide, Lebo, to just say there's nothing wrong with continuously advocating for the evolution and the elevation of an SCM role. But what is then important for us that have been here, dinosaurs that have been here for years, and also for those who are actually coming after us, is that we need to be brave enough to take the stand. Don't be scared to become involved in your own organizations and in items which may not be in your own space, because if we continue to develop ourselves, we can then start to move away from being in the shadows of CFOs, shadows of operations, and start to be in the equal footing where we can be seen as equals in the organizational management as such. I see that the time is almost up.
Yes, Mtutuzeli, thank you so much for sharing your insight. Let me tell you, anyone that knows me with platforms like this, when I start showing my face, it means time up. But thank you so much, Mtutuzeli, for joining us on this session. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it. We need to start running. Like we always say, there is nothing called comfort zone, because nothing grows in a comfort zone. We want to elevate our profession. We want to elevate ourselves. It's very important, colleagues, that we take the step forward. I'm not going to take the shine away from yourself. I'm going to allow the next 5 minutes before we close off, that whoever has got questions, that you raise your hand, and we can allow the panelists to respond to yourself. But also what I would want as well, as each and every panelist respond to a question, that they give us the last words of advice, of comfort, whichever it may be, before we close up the session. So anyone, any questions? I would have seen, you would have seen on the chat box, there's a couple of questions that has come our way. And one of the questions that, if I may request the panelists to show their faces, all of them at once, if you can switch on your videos, thank you. All right, thank you, colleagues. Thank you so much for that. I think there was a question around supply chain skills that, and I'm just trying to get to all the questions here around KPIs. That we don't necessarily have proper KPIs that allows us to be elevated in the organization. I think one of the comments that I said earlier was that we need to see our contribution on the bottom line of the organizations. And if we have that bottom line, we understand the strategy of the organization. The truth is our KPIs must be elevated to such level. What are your thoughts around that, Marianne, in terms of KPIs, in terms of alignment to the organizational strategies as well, being able to be seen as contributing to the bottom line of the organization? Your comment on that?
Thanks, Lebo, and thanks to the participant that asked that question. For me, the way I see it is, first, you have the responsibility for defining your own KPIs.
Yes.
So first start by that, because you're the one who's seeking that visibility. You need to start there. So we have the KPIs you sign with the vendors, and some of them are strategic. So we also need to pull and borrow through from that and say, for the strategic vendors where we spend like most of our money, then this is exactly, it's very clear what it is we're doing with them and the contribution to the bottom line. Yes. Number two, it's in terms of the KPIs, seek broadness. So there's KPIs to do with what the function is doing in terms of functional excellence, because I always say there is no point going to procurement and supply and asking them to negotiate and expect savings when they're not processing the purchase orders on time. Very simple things, operational items. So your operational dashboard must be green, and make sure you demonstrate that so that you move away from focus on process policies, etc., to where you're adding value. Then number three is have a very good understanding of what the organization aspires to deliver, because sometimes it's not just the cost saving. And the truth is, if you save 20% 3 years ago, you saved 5% last year, it's going to be more difficult to save an additional 5% this year, particularly in COVID times. So look at where you're focusing. If it is security of supply, then structure your KPIs to demonstrate that there were no stockouts because you did something related to contract management. If your KPIs are related to completing or faster turnaround times, you're building units constructing real estate because you want to make sure that customers are you're able to rent out space quickly, then structure a KPI to show that we've moved from a 360-day turnaround time to a 270-day turnaround time, and therefore the organization was able to sell an additional 5 units this year, because that still goes into the bottom line. Then the third point is, it is very important where you communicate and share these KPIs, because it should not be just within the function, it should also be at an overall organizational level. So depending on where your department reports, because many of them report into finance, it's in these finance meetings also show what value you're bringing, but also actively seek to present the same where the entire leadership team of the organization sits and say, this is the procurement contribution. Last year, you were only able to do 25 units and rent them out. This year, at our current running rate, you will do 35. So it's over to sales team to make sure we get the tenants, but procurement has done their bit. We've delivered faster. You have the units. So that's where I would encourage people to focus on in terms of the KPIs.
All right, thank you, Miriam, for that. I've got another question here with regards to most South African companies don't see much value in people who have actual extensive supply chain experience and qualifications. So they advertise supply chain roles, and the key criteria may be a CA or industrial engineers. And so this does not leave much job opportunities for experienced professionals or recent grads. Mthutuzeli, what are your thoughts around that? Because we've been talking about careers, we're talking about professions as well. Why is it that some organizations would really advertise a supply chain role with the requirements of the CA? Is there a reason why?
I think, Lebo, it is exactly what I mean. We have been speaking about, is that I think for a large extent we have almost missed our own bus. We had all of these chances over the years. We had the chance to then learn about all the other aspects in terms of business. The reason why many companies are starting to look for people outside of the space, it really goes back to that one little graph which I have just shown, is that they understand that foundation-wise, anybody can learn those. And I think I speak from all of us, is that what we have seen is that technical people have learned our own fundamentals so well, but then they actually have all the other elements that are needed for that role to then actually add value. We have been speaking about KPIs that are actually value adding to the advancement of key strategic areas of any organization. So what is then key, that when they are actually hiring anybody, they know that when it comes to the normal standard foundations, anybody can learn that. But what they need more is a candidate that fully understands what other value can be added by that role, which is then saying to us that, are we actually at some stage going to be still there if we do not focus on the other building blocks that we need to then learn? Because they are not looking for a specific person that will only know supply chain process, but they're also looking for somebody that really understands, what does the role add to my bottom line? Does that role understand how to actually develop an evolving strategy every year? Because we're now operating in an environment that is forever changing, not only for us, but also for the normal business environment. Therefore, they are looking for an agile person that will really understand all of those elements beyond the normal supply chain. And I feel that for us, we have kind of like stepped off our own bus over the years, and now we are trying to get back on it, whereas some people have taken over the wheel and they have actually perfected it. Now we are lagging behind, trying to actually be there. And I will say, I am a classic example of that. So you can tell me that oh, you are one of those accounting guys that came into, into our space, because I was one. What I saw this a few years ago, and I said, I studied finance, I studied accounting in detail, but then I said, what then will I do? That's all I want to do. Then I said, I must find a space that will be much more value adding to any organization, and boom, supply chain was one. And over the years, I have then actually said, because I have all the other um, um, elements which I need, I focus on then how do I develop my then my SCM side, whereas I had all the others. So in the future, it's going to unfortunately continue like that. And I wish we get to a point where actually certain roles like CPOs, they fall away, because actually that is a very elementary thing that simply focuses on one element of the supply chain. So how we title, how we actually develop our roles in the future will become quite key. Marianne mentioned it earlier on. Let's start moving to more saying chief supply chain officer, because that's more relevant than just a chief procurement
officer, indeed. And what you say is really around sending the right signal in the definitions of our roles as well. That is not about the chief procurement, because we're talking about procurement, but if you are accountable for the broader supply chain, it has to be a chief supply chain officer, not a chief. Indeed, that's very relevant. I agree with you on that one. So Catherine, there was one of the questions and more of a comment around why are we not re-emphasizing this at higher education in terms of this its strategic importance. I saw one of the comment, and I'm trying to read what it really say, but the question was really saying that emphasizing the strategic nature of supply chain at higher institutions as well. And I think it's more around, supply chain is very strategic, but we are not communicating it at a higher level and institutions of higher level. For an example, unlike Mtutuzeli, I used to be one of those students that learned, I studied purchasing. I'm one of those that started with purchasing, then I went into logistics, and all the way through my career has been supply chain. So that's what I studied for until where I am. So I'm one of those, people that started with it. However, like Mtutuzeli is just on a finance. But when I was a student then, no one taught me about the importance of supply chain until I got into the industry and understanding its dynamic nature, doing my own research around it. So the question is, why is it not really communicated at higher education? Is it because there is no, relationship and alignment between academia and what the industry requires, which may possibly be the issue, that there's just that misalignment in terms of what we require as the industry, and we're getting the graduates that are not really overemphasized in terms of their role into the communities and into the organization in terms of also within the value chains itself. What are your thoughts around that, Catherine? Please unmute, Catherine.
Thank you. I agree, Lebo, but I do think it is changing. The conversations have started. And I think from a CILT perspective, we see it a lot in the last year, where a number of education and training providers, places of higher learning, have approached us for recognition and developing supply chain courses. But I think it's a conversation that needs to continue and be consistent and ongoing. And once we elevate it through our interactions with stakeholders like National Treasury and the media, the landscape will start changing. But we have to be persistent and consistent with it. And what I wanted to add to that is, when we profile supply chain, we don't have to know everything to have a voice. We have to start somewhere. And that's what your network is for. You will never be an expert in everything in supply chain. So work with your network, but don't think you can't start the journey and go forth, because otherwise you will never be ready. Nothing will ever be the perfect starting time on your journey in supply chain.
All right, colleagues, you heard it from our panelists. Catherine, Tutuzeli, Marianne, thank you so much for joining us for the dialogue this morning. Really appreciate your input. And everyone on the chat, again, I'm going to just cover up what the colleagues have been saying. Is really around branding yourself, get to understand your role, get to understand what supply chain really is. Then if you understand your role, you can start selling yourself and saying, how can I help you? Like all these other slogans that you have seen. You need to know your role. If you're in procurement, know what procurement is. If you're in planning, know what planning is and how you contribute to the organization. It's around building your profile as well. It's around your growth. If you know that you want to grow within the corporate space, start building that profile. Have a mentor, have a coach, have a sponsor as well within the organizations, because sponsors are the people that elevate you out there, but also ensure that your KPIs can be seen by each and every stakeholder in the organization. Then they can say that you are adding value in your profession as well. Continue upskilling yourself, and always remember that upskilling does not necessarily mean going to get that extra qualification. It also speaks to understanding finance, because we contribute to the bottom line from the finance structure. It also challenges you to get to understand the technical side, the scope of work, the technical acumen. You may find yourself being a procurement specialist, but you're buying transformers, but you do not know what a transformer is. How does it look like? Develop your technical acumen around that, because now you can challenge your fellow engineers around that, because you understand what a transformer is as part of that process. Be part of the network. Be part of the network that exists. We have created this platform from the WISCA perspective, supply chain coach perspective, to say that engage with fellow professionals. We are going to be having more of these coaching circles. Most of you are asking the questions that, how do I get the mentorship? How do I get the coaching? African Women in Supply Chain Association is one of the organizations that we created for youth, for the women, for the entrepreneurs, also for professionals. And when I say professionals, inclusive of the male professionals in supply chain. We have professional networks like the SIPS, the SILSA, and so forth. We have SAPIX. We have a whole lot of organizations that are supporting us in this association. We want to make sure that you become part of these coaching circles. Then you get that mentorship and coaching. If you don't get it in your organization, be part of all our conversations. Our conversation will be more practical as possible to ensure that you understand the strategies, what's happening in the industry, to help you participate in our platform so that you can be elevated as well. Again, it's around branding. Let us elevate our profession to the next level. I want to see you as advocates out there. I want to see your articles coming our way. I want to see your articles on the newspapers, on TV, on LinkedIn as well. Let's have those conversations. Engaged colleagues. It's around us elevating the profession. Let us do that. And yourself, remember, you carry the baton. Your growth, your development, and you being successful depends on the decision that you are making today. Do you want to grow, or do you want to sit in your comfort zone? Again, colleagues, thank you so much for making time to join us this session. We will see you in the next 2 or 3 weeks. There's another conversations that is coming up. We will be communicating with yourself. Thank you so much. Colleagues, any other questions, you can always hit us on mentorship@awisca.org or mentorship@syncpoint.co.za. Thank you so much and wish you a blessed day. See you again soon. Thank you, bye.
Bye. Mm.